I mean, as everybody who knows me, I'm very much against seawalls. I'm against armoring the coast. And I think it should only be done when it's completely necessary for habitat protection and pre-existing structures. So what I'm a little confused about, because I don't know this area, I haven't seen it, is the likelihood of no revetment at this location that those neighborhoods will flood? I know they have in the past. The lady mentioned it.
In our view, it's a 100% certainty.
I see.
If the revetment, the berm weren't there.
And those structures have probably been there quite some time, I would assume.
Absolutely. I mean, if you were to remove the berm, you would open up, and to the extent you didn't want to protect the golf course, you would open up a whole new can of worms with respect to Highway 1 and the residential neighborhoods that are surrounding the golf course.
I see. I mean, that's a huge factor. You know, we haven't really come across that in a lot of our other discussions about seawalls.
My name is Spencer Potter, and I work in the Natural Resources Division of the San Francisco Recreation
As most
Parks
everyone here
Department. knows, that Laguna Salada wetland, which sits directly inland of Sharp Park, is home to populations for two listed species, the San Francisco garter snake and also the California red-legged frog. And both these species are protected under state and federal law. San Francisco Rec and Park does monitoring annually in the Laguna Salada wetland complex, and recent monitoring indicates a robust and growing population of California red-legged frogs. Because red-legged frogs are a primary food source for the San Francisco garter snakes, these surveys are also indicative of a healthy population of San Francisco garter snakes in Laguna Salada. As acknowledged in the staff report and as described in more detail in the 2012 Fish and Wildlife Service biological opinion for Sharp Park, the berm is critical for both frog and snake survival. The frogs, which are an essential food source for the snake, can only breed in fresh or brackish water, and for this reason, unrestricted saltwater intrusion into frog breeding environments is potentially detrimental to both frog and snake populations. Historical evidence suggests that the species did not always occupy Laguna Salada. Prior to the existence of the berm, salt water could get into this habitat, which would keep frog breeding from occurring. Historical species surveys also report dramatic dips in species populations following breaches of the saltwater, breaches of the berm, lending further weight to the conclusion that the berm is critical for the species survival. The importance of the Laguna Salada habitat for the existence of San Francisco garter snake as a species really can't be overstated. The Fish and Wildlife Service recovery plan for the snake identifies Laguna Salada as one of only six significant populations of San Francisco garter snake remaining in the entire world. The Laguna Salada is also important coastal breeding habitat for the frog population. As I mentioned, these feed the snakes, so you kind of have to have both to have one. Because the frogs cannot breed in a saline environment, and because the Sharp Park berm limits saltwater inundation, removal of the berm may result in impacts to both populations. In fact, as the Coastal Commission staff stated in a 2015 staff report for the Sharp Park Pump House project, and I quote here, "The Sharp Park is unusual in that the natural conditions are not necessarily the best conditions for the sensitive species in question. Under completely natural conditions, without the berm and with no pumping, California red-legged frogs would probably not exist as a site, as the water would be too brackish." And one final point on the environmental role that the Sharp Park berm plays. As described in the staff report, managed retreat of the Laguna Salada wetland is infeasible for several reasons. First of all, there's a lack of availability of a similarly sized wetland environment anywhere on the Sharp Park property or on adjacent land. And second, there's also a possible risk of mortality to species as a result of capture and removal and release that you'd have to do during a managed retreat of the wetland. And finally, there's a serious risk of failure of artificially created habitat areas. These things don't always take. And we did provide a extensive alternatives analysis to Coastal Commission staff that looked at several alternatives. I think there were 6 different alternatives that were reviewed, including a managed retreat alternative. And we looked at each of these carefully and weighed the various issues that might shake out of, based on each outcome. And this analysis concluded that the only feasible alternative in this case, given the environmental interests that were at stake and the recreational interests and also the public safety interests that were at stake, was the preservation of the berm. Not further hardening of the berm, but just keeping it as it is. And finally, the last thing I wanted to say is that endangered species habitats are protected even if they are artificial. In this case, the species came in after the berm was created, and they still are worthy of protection nonetheless. The Fish and Wildlife Service has extensively reviewed this issue in the 2012 biological opinion and looked at the history of this wetland habitat, and they concluded that in order to keep these species alive, the berm must stay there. So.
Commissioner Peskin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As staff just said, this is a remarkably complicated case. Actually, if somebody wants to write a doctoral dissertation on this case, it has absolutely everything. It's got the Endangered Species Act, it's got recreation, it's got natural resource issues, it's got litigation, it's got historic preservation issues, it's all there. This is an interesting one for me and Commissioner Groom, insofar as I happen to be a San Francisco supervisor that owns 417 acres in Carol Groom's neighboring county of San Mateo. This was a bequest to the city some 100 years ago, and indeed that Alister MacKenzie golf course came along in the 1930s. And it has been the subject of a lot of controversy over a number of years. Obviously, and I'm saying this not in my Coastal Commission role, but there are issues of financial liability to the city and county of San Francisco, insofar as that seawall has been breached in the early 80s. And I want to hear a lot from my fellow commissioners, but I do fundamentally believe, and if there's any town on the California coast that knows that Mother Nature bats last, it's Pacifica, where, as you heard, buildings are falling into the sea. When we review this as though it were not there, which is the standard that is before us today, it's really tough. I mean, would we permit something like this today anew? I don't think so. But the reality is, it is there. It does protect not only the recreational resource, but a number of structures in the town of Pacifica. And so you can't pretend that it's not there, although that's the standard of review that is before us.
Owned and operated by the city and county of San Francisco. And so I'd like to say a couple of words about the city of Pacifica and the relationship to the city and the golf course. Pacifica is a classic California beach town, and it has been ravaged in the last couple of years by the elements. There have been apartment houses that have been lost. The economics of the city have been harmed by that in terms of property tax and certain other individual taxes. And the golf course does provide a fair amount of revenue to the city in terms of golf fees. I want to say that the golf fees are very low for a course of this caliber. This really does constitute low-cost visitor serving recreation. The clubhouse has provided is a basic little income generator, but it's also provided for many civic opportunities, lots of weddings, lots of baptisms, lots of birthday parties, and so it does serve as kind of the circle of the entertainment and celebration parts of Pacifica. Pacifica's also had unfortunately, a fairly unstable political situation as well, with a lot of different city managers and a lot of different city council people. And so perhaps Pacifica itself hasn't been as attentive as it could be to the golf course, and maybe could have worked better with the city and county of San Francisco in some manner of speaking. The other issue about the golf course, it is surrounded by neighborhoods, surrounded by the Pacific Ocean and neighborhoods. And if we eliminated or didn't shore up the seawall. I'm really concerned about flooding issues in those neighborhoods, especially as we had a really strong winter last year. Another strong winter is expected this year. And there's several neighborhoods that could be flooded, could have water damage if we didn't protect the golf course as such. So I think that I would certainly be willing to listen to changing of dates or changing of things, but I do think, I hate to disagree with many of the strong environmental groups that think that the Pacifica Golf Course should not be protected like this, but because it is such an important part of Pacifica, such an important part of the economy, and very integral to the survival of that neighborhood, I think we should adopt the staff recommendation even with some modifications.
Thank you, Commissioners. My name is Robin Reneals, and I'm a resident of Sharp Park in Pacifica. A resident in Sharp Park, homeowner for 42 years. My first experience with the levee, you guys call it the berm, was 35 years ago when it really didn't exist. And in 1983, my neighborhood flooded because the golf course flooded. Additionally, a pump failed in our neighborhood, and it was an extremely heavy rain in January. And as a result, you could have gotten to the base of my street, which is about a half a block off of the golf course, in a kayak. So many properties flooded. Lindemar flooded that year. It was just a real wet year. And I'm sure it made the frogs very, very happy. But after that, the levee was reinforced, and we realized the importance of that structure to our neighborhood. In being a resident in that neighborhood for so many years, I've worked on various committees to help do improvements. We worked on relocating our sewer plant to a better location, making it tertiary for the environment. And we have an existing sewer plant in Palmetto, which the city right now is working very hard, long-term plans to develop Palmetto into our main street. We have a public library there. We have a middle school that serves the north end of town. We've got our city services, many businesses, and hundreds of homes in Sharp Park. The importance of maintaining that levee and armoring it is very, very critical to Fairway Park and Sharp Park. And on the Sharp Park side, we have a pier and we have a promenade, which in itself will be something that we need to address in the near future in order to maintain continual protection just for Sharp Park alone. So this structure of the levee, in addition to what Sharp Park currently has, are integral to protect the area and these neighborhoods. And I ask you to please support staff and those recommendations. And also, I'd like to bring attention to you a letter that was probably just sent in yesterday, written by Julie Lancel, a former mayor of Pacifica and past board member and director of the Pacifica Land Trust. And she also is supporting the staff report to maintain this levee. And I'm here to support our neighborhoods. So please, for that reason, go for it. Thank you.
I'm Paul Slavin. I'm a resident of Fairway Park in Pacifica, which is adjacent to the Sharp Park golf course. The golf course and hundreds of my neighbors have been protected for decades by the embankment guarding the western side of the golf course. The anti-golf extremists, if I might say, have for years objected to the maintenance of the levee in the hopes that the deterioration of the berm would result in the destruction of the golf course. If that happens, the Fairway Park neighborhood would also face destruction. The extremists contended some years ago that smaller dikes or levees placed closer to the residences would provide protection. But while they would like to see the existing embankment begin deteriorating right now, and have advocated for its removal for years, no plans have been made for the replacement dikes. No research, no engineering, no funding, no real thought about that. It looked to me like the Republicans' plan to replace Obamacare which was never actually a real plan. The loss of the levee at Sharp Park and the seawall to the north would be devastating to Pacifica. I urge the commission to support the strengthening, the armoring, and the regular maintenance of whatever structure is necessary to protect our community. Thank you.